Thank you, Alaska and Corla. The local property finance bill 2025. I'll comment directly on that in a few moments. And obviously, it's been brought forward to raise more money. But just a couple of things for context: that the abolition of rates by Fianna Fáil in 1977 completely removed the sustainable source of funding for local government. And while an election was won on the back of it, in fact, a landslide victory was won on the back of it, not long after that, the incoming government increased taxes. I remember it at the time, watching your pay packet evaporate. The shortfall was made up by heaping more tax on top of workers, and that wasn't the way to go either. So while there was a short-term benefit for the government coming into power, getting into power and having finances, it leaned harder on ordinary workers. Not having control of finance completely impedes councillors in their role and what they're supposed to do and perform their functions. And taking away that function of taking away the rates base in 1977, it completely undermined local democracy. However, the problem is with local property tax is there are a number of issues around it, is that it lacks transparency for the public and how it's spent and divided up or allocated. The reality is as well that within local councils is management of councils take the lead in terms of how it's divvied out, and will tell councillors what they can do and what they can't do, and why we must put money into this area and into that area, and a certain amount of arm twisting in terms of getting budgets through. Councillors in reality get very little say over it. The other big problem with it is the means of the owners. LPT, as it was introduced in 2012 and 13, it takes no account whatsoever of the income of the owner. So you could have somebody in a house worth $500,000 or 0.6 or 0.7 of a million, but maybe on just a single state pension. You could have a widow or widower living on a state pension, Count with very little disposable cash income in terms of paying it. So if you look at Laois last year, it was projected there was the possibility, as it's framed, to raise €11.6 million was the total that could be realised. That was up 3.1 million. But residents need to be told more clearly, Minister, what to get in return, and that's a real issue. And we must also remember that people who own their own house, they already in Oireachtas have pled stamp duty, they're paying high mortgages, and the LPT, local property tax, turns out to be a tax on debt in some instances. They still have to fork out for services that were privatised, refuse collection. More and more families are having to dig deep into their pockets to fund the running of schools, just the basics for schools, keeping the lights on and the heating going, and basic work done on the school. That's what's happening throughout the country, and at the moment a lot of schools are on overdraft. Indeed, Into representatives told me, and I'm sure they told others last week here, that a substantial number of schools are running in the red, and that's not sustainable in the long term, and that needs to be addressed in the budget. The capitation grant, while there was a very modest increase in it last year, is still way behind for primary schools where it needs to be, and I would ask that that be addressed in the budget. The concerns I also have about the bill, while Section 4 and Section 5 are welcome in relation to the exemptions for defective concrete blocks and the ability to claim a 6-year exemption, they're welcome in themselves, because obviously the people who have been affected by that are facing enough difficulties. However, when we go to Section 7, that provides for a new charge methodology for LPT. All valuation bands are widened by 20%, which looks okay on the face of it, but band 1 has been increased from 90 to 95 euros, the baseline, with the potential to increase by 25% on top of that. Band 2 from 225 to 235, again with the potential for that to be increased on top of it. And this is one that I was reading with some interest, that the basic rate is also set to be decreased that is, from from 0.1029% to 0.0906%, which will apply to properties valued up to 0.126 million. So that could mean that somebody who would have a good income and somebody who's fairly well off and living in a house worth, $1.25 million could actually do quite well out of this, in comparison to workers maybe who are in a family or in a home worth 300,000 or 250 or 400,000. And that's, I'm not sure of the rationale for that, but it's certainly, on the way it's framed in the bill, it looks like this is going to benefit that cohort of people who happen to be in a house worth up to $1.25 million and also have a very good income. I think the other area of concern is that while the variations allowed in it, they're allowed up to 25%, that is to increase, but to reduce is only 15%. And looking at the list for the last couple of years, you can see that a lot of local authorities, including Laois increased theirs by 15%. So are those who are going to feel the brunt of the extra increases in terms of the bands and the rates that are being changed, are they also going to be facing 25% in October when it comes to framing the budget? And I just think that needs to be factored in. The main point, Minister, is that in an ideal world, local authorities need to be able to raise some money themselves. PAYE tax was increased dramatically, and those who were working throughout the 70s and 80s will remember this. The corresponding increase was for PAYE workers to take the hit when the rates were abolished. It did destroy local authority their remit and local democracy, unfortunately. And in the ideal world, you would have a sustainable funding at local level while taking into account the needs of workers. The key point here is in relation to the LPT as it's been framed over the last 12 years, is there's no account taken whatsoever of means, and that's simply not good enough. I think that that has to be factored into it. Also, the lack of transparency in how it's spent, and I would like to see improvements on that, and the also the role of councillors, that councillors are given a greater say. And just the other thing I would say to you, Minister, on local government funding, an awful lot of money in the last 5 or 6 years is going directly to projects, to the management team of the councils, and this is one that I want to flag up with you sincerely. This is a real problem. There's projects that I've seen starting, and if you ask a local councillor, where did that come from? They would say that we had no notice of that. It didn't come before the councillors for a decision. So it could be the Department of Arts, it could be the Department of Sports, it could be any department that's lobbing money straight down to local authorities. But there is the chamber of the local authority, which is the primary essence of local government, that is being completely undermined. And when you start undermining local democracy, you start undermining democracy overall. And I have real concerns, and I say this sincerely to you. I said this to Phil Hogan back here in the chamber in the first year I was here back in 2011, that I have real concerns about local government being undermined and people not seeing local government as being valued and relevant, that to see what they're voting for, given that control. I think that if we continue undermining local government in the way we've been doing it over the last number of years, and I can rattle them off, as I'm sure other people here in the chamber can, all the different functions that's been taken away from councillors in the last 25 years, I do think that we're going to further erode people's trust in local government. It's the nearest form of government to the people. People generally know their local councillor. They can talk to the local councillor. The local councillor has access to senior officials. They have access to us. They can contact ministers, a group of them if they want to, which they regularly do. They have a right under the 2001 Act to make representations to statutory bodies and public bodies such as the ESB, semi-state bodies, the HSE, etc., and it has to be taken account of it. And I just think, instead of continuing to erode the role of councillors and local government, we need to increase it. But one area that does need to be tackled and dealt with by government at central level is that departments and department officials, I'm not too sure of it how much ministers say, but senior department officials, is that there's money being transferred from various departments of government. It's going straight to local authority staff, senior management, And, you know, I'm not saying most of those people are good as well, but the councillors do not have any say in how that's allocated or divvied out or used or monitored. And that's not a good thing to do. So that's my take on it. I think that there's the weakness in the system is that lack of accountability and the lack of fairness because of the means of the household are not being taken into consideration. And I would like to see government maybe move to take that into account in future years. Thank you, Concola.
Thank you, Deputy Brown.